this computer. Okay. This is a share on Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chaf Aleph, the 21st book of Likutei Sichos. The Sicha is on Vayakhel, the second Sicha of Vayakhel. Starts off seeming a little daunting because the first two words is in Zohar, about what it says in the Zohar. But the Sicha is going to be quite relatable. In the Zohar of this week's Parsha, it is related at one time when the Chavraya, the group of Talmidei Chachamim, scholars, particularly we're talking here about the Chavraya, the group of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, when they were once by him and they were talking matters of secrets of Torah. So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai saw that Rabbi Yosef, have a Maharer b'mili d'alma, was thinking about matters of the world, worldly matters. So he called out to him and he says, Yosef, kum ashlim diyuknach, rise and complete your picture. Probably there's a better translation. Come and rise. Your image.
Perfect your image.
Perfect your image. He says, Yosef, rise and perfect your image, because there's one letter missing in you. In other words, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai saw that for the fact that Rabbi Yosef had his minds vested in Mili Dalma and worldly matters, there was something missing in his image. There was one letter missing in his image, the image of his name, and therefore he alerted him to the fact. Later, Rabbi Yosef indeed arose and he was joyous with matters of Torah. In other words, he joined and participated in the teaching, in the learning. Rabbi Shimon looked at him and he says, Rabbi Yosef, Hashta now and Shlim, now you are complete, and your image is complete. And then Rabbi Shimon went on to say a discourse on the verse about the making of the tzitz. So now let's understand this story. It seems to be quite a wondrous story, a story that's has some questions attached to it. What's the questions? How could it be that Rabbi Yosef, who was from the greatest of the Tanoim of the Mishnaic sages, and he was right now in the company of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and his holy group. They were talking Torah, and he's, should I use language of 2024, and he's spacing out, thinking about matters of the world, daydreaming. God forbid he wasn't daydreaming, but thinking about matters that are not Torah. He's there with Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He's one of the greatest sages. And even if you would like to find an explanation that he was thinking about matters of the world, exactly opposite of what I said, spacing out. He was actually focused on thinking in worldly matters which the Torah would instruct him to think about, to the extent that he even has the right, and it's proper, to interrupt the secrets of the Torah which were then being spoken. So if that's the case, on the flip side, we have a question. If right now Rabbi Yosef is understanding that he needs to be thinking about other matters which require his attention, we'll soon talk about what those matters may be, but if he needs to be defocused from Torah, focused on worldly affairs, so how is it that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai perceives in him that there's now something lacking in him? If he's doing what he's meant to do, why is something lacking? And if he's not doing what he's meant to do right now, he's supposed to be studying Torah and his mind is distracted to some worldly matter. How is that something that Rabbi Yosef would be capable of? Great sage, and in the presence of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Paragraph 2. So we could maybe explain this based on an explanation from my father, says the Rebbe, in his notes on the Zohar, as will be noted in paragraph 3. But first, let's preface something else. Even though Rabbi Yosef was from the group of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai in this instance, in other words, he was part of the Chevraya. The Chevraya is the group, which in general, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai led a group of elite scholars who were called Toratan Umnutan, that the Torah was their full-time occupation. However, he quite obviously, we know, was not always in that character, in that description in the group, that the only thing they do is study Torah. And therefore, because the only thing they do is study Torah, they don't interrupt the Torah study to be involved in any other occupation, worldly occupation, as the Gemara, but that's not the case with Rabbi Yossi. We know that Rabbi Yossi is described by the Gemara as being one who is an expert in tanning hides. That's quite a difficult profession. So if Rabbi Yossi is an expert at tanning hides, obviously not from the group that has the Torah as a full-time occupation. Also, we do find that Rabbi Yossi was involved in communal work. For example, we find various instances that in Sipori, the city that he was in, he enacted various communal, various takanas, various enactments. So obviously he had one foot at least in communal activities. So he wasn't from the elite secluded group of Yeshiva and Yochai. At least he wasn't always part of that group that did nothing but study Torah. He was tanned hides, and we know that he did communal enactments. So according to this, we'll have to say that when we say that Rabbi Yossi is thinking about worldly matters, we could say that it was actually communal matters of worldly nature. In other words, he was not thinking about Torah because he had some appointments to schedule, or he had some needy people he needed to tend to, whatever it may be. And that's why he interrupted. He made the calculation that the right thing from him to do right now was to interrupt hearing the Torah of Hashem Yechai, because we know that when you're involved in tzarchei tzibur and the needs of the public, it pushes off your obligation to study Torah. How do we know that? We know that points out in a ha'ara, because we know it in a side way. Somebody who is involved in worldly, let's start like this. Somebody whose full-time occupation is Torah interrupts to say Shema in its proper time. Someone, however, who is full-time who's right now occupied in communal matters, and there's something that benefits the community that requires his attention, doesn't stop for davening. So if he doesn't stop for davening, yet somebody whose full-time occupation does stop for Shema, and he doesn't stop for Shema, that means that communal affairs is more important than study Torah, right? That's the logical conclusion. So that's why he understood he has a communal obligation at this time. He interrupted. He wasn't listening to the teaching of Rabbi Shimon Yochai. And we would be more, it would be more viable for us to say, it would seem to make more sense for us to say that he was involved in communal matters. It wasn't just his own livelihood that he was stopping for. Although, for somebody to be involved in making a livelihood, he's not obligated to study Torah. One is not obligated to study Torah to the point where one can't support oneself. The obligations of supporting oneself, the responsibilities of support, allow one to take time off from Torah to support themselves. So that could have been here also. Why was he not listening to the shir? Maybe he had to call his stockbroker and sell a stock because it was a good time to sell. That could be, but it seems much more noble, seems much more simple to fit into Rabbi Yossi's profile to say that he had a communal thing that came up. That's why he wasn't studying. Later on, we'll say that it's possible he also had a personal thing, a parnasa related thing. But right now, we're going with the notion that he was involved in a communal matter. That's why he wasn't studying. And with this, we can also understand why, nonetheless, even though he was doing what was right, he was involved in a communal thing, and for that, he took his mind away from Torah. Nonetheless, because he was involved in this communal thing, he had a diminishment in his own spiritual stature, because we know that one who is occupied in communal responsibility, although it pushes off Torah, and it's something he needs to do for the benefit of the community, but the price that the person pays personally is that there may be a diminishment in his knowledge and involvement in Torah. That's a price one pays. As we know that Chazal say, when Eldad and Medad were prophesying and it was creating a disturbance, they were saying things that nobody wanted to hear. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Hatel aleim tzarich yitzibah, very simple. You want to get them to be diminished a level. Throw them into communal work, they will be diminished automatically. In other words, because now you would think if you're doing what you're supposed to do and you're doing you're doing something for the tzibur, for the community, you'd be elevated. But no, the fact of the matter is you're studying less. And we find this interesting, Purim related, we find this by Mordechai. Find by Mordechai that this is another lengthy talk of the Rebbe in another place, but he remained a Mishnah Lamelech. And first of all, there's a very interesting thing. It says at the end of the Megillah, Mordechai is the hero. So you think, give him a break. Everybody would be treating him with hero status. The last words of the Megillah are phenomenal. Ki Mordechai HaYehudi, Mordechai the Jew, Mishneh Lamelech Achashverosh. He's the second in command to the king Achashverosh. Vegadol HaYehudim. And the Jews hold him, he was a great leader amongst the Jews. V'ratzui l'roi v'chav, and favorable to most of his brothers. What do you mean? Even a great hero like Mordechai doesn't get a unanimous vote of approval by all his brothers, most of his brothers. And the Gemara says, Pirshu mimenu miktzat Sanhedrin. Some of the Sanhedrin broke ranks with Mordechai. Why did they break ranks with Mordechai? Because they said, Mordechai, why are you still staying in your position of Mishnah Lamelech HaChashverosh? You're the Sanhedrin man. Why are you in a government position? I'm in a government position because you see what happened to the Jews, and you see how having a place in the palace was the way Hashem chose to save us. So I think I should kind of keep my vice president, position when right now there's a danger to the Jews, and we don't know what the president's going to do, and we don't know what the Congress is going to do. We don't know what the Senate's going to do. I'm vice president. So some of the Chachamim said, yeah, but you're in the Sanhedrin. You're not going to be able to keep up your rigorous study schedule. So most of the Sanhedrin said, stay as viceroy. But some said, no, trust in Hashem, leave that position, go back to study. And we find, as pointed out here in the footnote, we find that Mordechai, Rashi points out on the Megillah, in the places in Tanakh where we talk about those that went up afterwards to Ezra, to Eretz Yisrael, so on. Anyway, when we find Mordechai, he's initially placed number 4 in the lineup of great scholars, and after the story of Purim, he becomes number 5. In other words, he was diminished. He lost some of his stature. So it says the Rabbi like this. We've talked about the fact that because Mordechai was a Mishnah Lamelech, a deputy to the king, and that meant that he had to be less involved in Torah, and he went into political work, into the work of rulership, which required from him various responsibilities, right? Took away from his time. He did it conscientiously. And that was for the benefit of the Jewish people, and it definitely pushes off the obligation to study Torah. Nonetheless, he did have a diminishment in his stature. And the Chachamim saw him as less chashuv, as less important. In other words, it had an effect on him. In other words, so therefore we can understand the story. Rabbi Yosef is with Rabbi Shimon Yochai. He's thinking about something else. He's something he should be thinking about. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, hello, there's something missing in you, your image. Rabbi Yosef, rectify your image. He starts thinking about Torah. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, oh, good. You're back to yourself. So what's the explanation here? Paragraph 3. Explanation is also taken from a explanation of the Rebbe's father. He says in his notes on the Zohar. On this story, he says that the fact that Rabbi Yossi was thinking about Mili da Alma, about matters of the world, it's not idle matters, God forbid, but it's the concept of what we call Amal Sicha, the toil of talk, which is also a big thing. What does this mean? Like we've spoken, so there's a pasuk, and it's brought based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which brings a pasuk from Iyov that says, Adam la'amal yulad. man is created to toil. And the Gemara says, what kind of toiling? Any a day, I don't know, does it mean la'amal Torah toiling in Torah? First of all, is the Gemara there says, I don't know, does it mean toiling in work or toiling in mouth? Amal sicha, is it something that's done verbally? And then it says, no, it must be, the Gemara derives from another pasuk, it's got to do with toil of the mouth. But when I say toil of the mouth, is it sicha or Torah? Sicha, what is sicha? Sicha means using the mouth to do what is human. In other words, being a human and acting responsibly in the world. In other words, interacting with the world in a way that you're elevating the world, working, acting properly. Or is it purely using your mouth for Torah? Is it amal sicha? Amal Torah is the toil with the humanness of speech. In fact, elsewhere it's also explained that perhaps sicha and Torah sicha is tefillah, is prayer you do with the mouth. Torah is saying no, that the main toil is Torah. The Gemara finishes off that the main toil is Torah. But what is sicha? It doesn't say that the toil of speech is non-existent. It just says that the highest level is Torah, but the other level is also part of our existence, part of our life. But what does amal sicha do? So amal sicha, toiling in speech, is a great, the Gemara brings it as a prelude and as an option of perhaps that's the purpose why man is created. So even though the Gemara says, no, there's a higher purpose than just speech, it's using your mouth for Torah, but that doesn't totally negate the concept that there's something very important in the human gift of speech, which requires toil. In other words, working in this world in a way that you're elevating the world. On the contrary, in order to get, it's actually a progression. In order to be able to properly reach Amal Torah, the toil of Torah, you really have to go through the concept of Amal Sicha. What does it mean, Sicha? If we paraphrase or if we correlate speech to Hashem's concept of speech, so there's the speech, there's two kinds of words that Hashem utters, two sets of utterances. One is the 10 commandments. That's Torah. What is the other form of speech that Hashem engages in? The beginning of creation, Asara Ma'amarot, the 10 utterances. So if we parallel that in this Gemara to our service of Hashem, Amal Sicha, toiling in speech, will be correspondent to Hashem's speech, creation of the world. And that will mean the way a person interacts in the physical world and does what he needs to do in the world, having a parnasa, communal work. And then there's the speech, the amal, the labor a person does through speech also, but corresponding to Hashem's speech in Torah, to the 10 commandments, amal Torah, the toil he does in Torah. So when we do the speech, amal sicha, when we toil in speech, in other words, we use the Marsha there says on the Gemara that we use our humanness. Person is a medaber. We interact as in this world with the das that we have as humans, fulfilling Hashem's desire in the world. In other words, I guess as we said, that could be either parnasa or communal work. So then we are causing that Hashem should also, so to speak, correspondingly say his 10 utterances, the 10 utterances of the creation. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that actually the 10 utterances of creation are constantly there, enclosed in the world, to bring the creation ex nihilo, something from nothing, into constant reality. And that's what is Mili da Alma. Rabbi Yosef was involved in words of the world. What is Mili da Alma? We know that the Asarim Amoris are referred to as Milin de Hedyoita, words of the simpleton. They're not Torah. They're what Hashem, mundane, so to speak. Mundane, it's Hashem words, but they're words to create simplistic things like the world. So Rabbi Yosef was therefore, when we talk about Rabbi Yosef, thinking about Mili da Alma, matters of the world, don't forget we're talking about the word, though, the way the world is as created by Hashem, and as such, yes, it's simple. It's merely the alma, words, things of the world that Hashem wants us to fulfill. So let's translate that into avodah, into what that would mean in the expression of serving Hashem that we're talking about. Thinking about worldly matters, which we're calling here amal sicha, the toil, the labor of speech, again, because it corresponds to the 10 ma'amaros, sicha, that would be the kind of avodah, the kind of service Hashem, which is birurim, which is the refinement of the world. The world being made up of the 10 utterances, and working with the sicha, working with the words of Hashem, is refining the worlds. That's the amal, that's the labor. How do we do that? Through serving Hashem, through all your deeds, through directing and doing everything you do for the sake of heaven, and for all your paths. Know Hashem in everything that you do in all your paths. In other words, the refinement and elevation and meaningfulness that one injects into the things, the optional things that a person does, not the non-mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are obviously godly. We're talking about mundane life being injected with purpose, because it's in the world of Hashem that you're doing it, and it's for the purpose to serve Hashem. That creates a kiyum that maintains the world. Because what happens is, when we are engaged in the 10 utterances of Hashem in creation, Hashem likewise says those creative words, and the world continues to be, and because it's living up to its potential, to its meaning. However, of course, we understand that that's not to be compared to the greater level of fulfillment of study of Torah. And by the way, before we get to study of Torah, the way we've just presented mundane work, this is not mundane. Making out there in the world, wherever Hashem directs a person, that's where he has to make his living, when it's reframed from the perspective that this is his toil of sicha, this is his toil within the 10 utterances of Hashem that create the world, and by him living in a way that Hashem wants, and being focused on having an outcome that's godly from his work, and feeling in his work that he's doing it in a way that Hashem wants him to do, that's not so worldly. That can be quite meaningful and inherently connected to Hashem. So in that way, says the Rebbe in a footnote, we could say Rabbi Yosef was thinking not about communal things. We don't have to say only communal work is holy or is important for you to take away your focus from Torah. It could be he was involved in simply in keeping his business open. But noting the fact that that living in the world can be and should be an avodah, an amal, a toil in maintaining Hashem's sicha in Hashem's world. So that's also a valid reason to take your mind away from Torah and put it into whatever you're meant to be doing at that time. Because if it's focused in the right way, it's also inherently godly and connected. However, we do understand that still, when we look at the level, at the intensity of kedusha, at the actual revealed aspect of its virtue, if somebody's toiling in Torah, it is more virtuous in terms of the level, especially when we're talking about the hidden secrets of the Torah. Because even though through toiling in Hashem's world, amal sicha, and the utterances of Hashem, you enable the kiyum ha'olam, the functioning of the world through Hashem saying the 10 utterances, and more than that, when we really look into it, the intention of Hashem sending us down here below. Why does the neshama come down? It's not about the neshama fixing itself. The neshama was perfect before it came down. The neshama has a mission to rectify the body and the animal soul and the aspects of the world to which it's attached. Everybody has aspects of the world, either his workplace, his family, the place he lives, the things he engages in. Everything that attaches himself to him means that it's his opportunity, it's his goal that needs to be. Hashem wants him to try and elevate those things. And through that avodah of refinement and elevation of the world, that's where Hashem's intended goal comes to be, which is Hashem desire to have a dwelling place in the lower world. So it's not that there's anything lowly about engagement in the world. That's really where the action is. That's what Hashem's intention was. But 1 second, but didn't we just say that the highest level of toil man is created for is for Torah? So the Rabbi says here in a footnote, because yes, it is, but it's the way Torah affects the world. Still, it's not Torah the way Torah is in an abstract way, removed from the world, studied by a neshama that's in the world of Atzilus or something, in the higher world. It's the way one learns Torah down here. So that's still a process and part of the dwelling place in the lower worlds. But certainly a big part of Dira B'Tachteinim, if we look at the stated objective of the neshama coming down, it's when he's involved in worldliness. Nonetheless, the toil of Torah is higher in level in terms of its finesse, in terms of its actual measurable holiness is higher than the toil in the world in a godly way. Why? Because that draws down Hashem's light that's vested in Torah, which is higher than the world. So you can't. So that's why in Rabbi Yossi's name there was something missing when he was engaged in the worldly matters. He wasn't engaged in Torah. Said Rabbi Shimon Yochai said, "Look, you're diminished." If you ask Rabbi Yossi, do you regret what you were doing? He said, I got to do what I'm doing. It's not against Hashem's will. I'm doing now Hashem's will. So why is Rabbi Shimon Yochai pointing out that there's something missing? It's very interesting that we're going to discover. What we're going to discover is they're both true. He was doing what he's meant to do, and there was a diminishment. And they work hand in hand. So a little bit deeper. Let's go a little deeper here. Paragraph 4. Because if we go a little deeper, it's not enough of an explanation why Rabbi Shimon Yochai said there's something missing in you. That's a very, very that's like an accusation. If he would have said, look, you're not up to par with our group, okay? But he's saying you're not up to par with yourself. Excuse me. We know that the Tanoim and Amiroim, the Mishnaic sages and the Gemara sages, their behavior was according to the source of their souls. Like here also, why Rabbi Yossi was involved and engaged in thinking about worldly matters. So the Rabbi says, my father explains that Rabbi Yossi was from the level called Malchus. Malchus is the 10th of the 10th Sephirot. It's the source for the worlds of Bria, Yetzir, Asir. It's in the top world of Atzilus, the 10th sphere. The 10th sphere is Malchus, which becomes really the crown of the next more creative state of the world. And what creates, when we talk about the 10 utterances that form the world, that really becomes a reality in Malchus. There's those, Malchus is also compared to a mouth, to speech, the 10 utterances. So we understand why Rabbi Yossi was doing what he was meant to be doing. So how does Rabbi Shimon Yochai come and contest that Rabbi Yossi has a diminishment? In other words, if Rabbi Yossi's mission from Hashem in this world was to engage in Amal Sicha, to engage in toiling in the 10 utterances of Hashem in this world, and make the world a redemptive place, an elevated place, so good. You could say that he didn't reach the high level of Shimon Yochai in terms of the advantage of Shimon Yochai has of higher level light, because Torah is higher level light. But if you want to talk, though, about fulfilling the mission of Hashem, Rabbi Yossi was fully fulfilling the mission of Hashem by fulfilling his mission, by doing his thing, either of communal leadership that he was busy in, or engaging in the world, in his own personal business, in the way Hashem wants him to, and thus elevating the world. So how does Rabbi Shimon Yochai say there's something missing in your name? He says you have something you're doing wrong. A person's name is an expression of his neshama. How does a person get in a we say the person, it's a nevuah ktana, it's a minor prophecy, but really the name you have is an indication of something going on, of where your neshama is and its interface with the body. So Rabbi Yossi obviously has this mission, and yet Rabbi Shimon Yochai is telling him there's something missing in your name because you're not living up to what my mission is. I don't have to live up to your mission. And here the Rebbe brings in the famous Vart of Reb Zusha Vanipoli, one of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich, who said that he's not worried when he comes up from heaven. Why they're going to ask him why he's not like one of the big tzaddikim of the yesteryears. He says, what I'm worried about is when they ask me why I wasn't Zusha. So the complete state of fulfillment by a person is to live up to his mission. No, Rabbi Yosef's mission obviously was. We know it from his level of malchus. We know it from the fact that the Gemara describes that he was involved in communal work in Siperi. He made enactments. We know from the fact that it says he knew how to tan hides. So he's obviously his job is to elevate the world, to refine the world. So why is Rabbi Shimon Yochai casting aspersion on him living up to his mission, to his name? More than that, since the fact, Rabbi Shimon Yochai is saying that the fact that he doesn't have the virtue of the other mode of service, learning Torah, there becomes a diminishment in his name. You know what kind of effect that will have on him? Rabbi Shimon Yochai is not trying to bully Rabbi Yossi, God forbid, or to put him into a depression. But if you all of a sudden are doing what you're meant to do, and comes along your teacher, the revered Rabbi Shimon Yochai, and he says, "Hey, you're faulty. You're not living up to your name. What's that supposed to do to him? You know what? That has the ability, has the power to discourage him, take away from him his simcha v'tov levav, his happiness, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya." It says, you should always look at yourself like a Rasha. It says, how could that be? If you look at yourself like a wicked person, you're not going to be able to serve Hashem with joy. It's critical to serve Hashem. You need to feel positive, not egoistic, not arrogant, but positive. Today's Hayom, I think, was that point. To be too stringent on yourself and try and find negativities that don't really exist is wrong. Just as wrong as being too lenient with yourself and finding good things by yourself you don't have. But here Rabbi Yossi is living up, the way we're seeing it, he's living up to his mission. Rabbi Shimon Yochai is giving him a downer. Why? In other words, it may even diminish his involvement in his mission. That kind of... Also, we have to understand why Rabbi Yossi didn't feel it himself. Why does Rabbi Shimon Yochai have to be the one to point it out? And then, when he does learn, again, he doesn't seem to feel by himself that he's reached a level of completion. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, "You've been joyous in matters of the Torah, right? Now you've come to a complete state." Who tells him that? Rabbi Shimon Yochai. Why doesn't Rabbi Yossi self-analyze? Why doesn't he feel it in himself? So, paragraph 5, the explanation is that this is the point. What's the point? Rabbi Yossi, from his own perspective, in other words, according to the mission he's been given based on the source of his soul, the fact that he thinks about worldly matters was not a diminishment. It was not veering off track. On the contrary, his name and mainly his image, they were in a complete state. That's what he was meant to do. But Rabbi Shimon Yochai, and that's what he felt. He felt, I'm on track. I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And everything's dandy. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, now that you're in this group of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is the paradigm of Torah, say that the Torah is his sole occupation. So now that you're with us right now, you should be adopting, at least temporarily, our modus operandi. And that's why Rabbi Shimon Yochai points out, look, based on my perspective and the perspective of what I'm expecting from people that have joined this group for now, at least, there's something missing in your image, something missing in your completed state. So let's understand this. We're going to go now into a fascinating discussion about the obligation to learn Torah and about the accomplishments we're meant to achieve in this lifetime and perhaps even to come back another time to fulfill what we didn't fulfill this time. So paragraph 6. Interesting that the Rebbe said several times that because Mashiach is about to come, so there's no time to wait for the next Gilgul, reincarnation. We got to take care of everything now. Yeah. So we'll understand this according to what the Alter Rebbe brings in the laws of Talmud Torah. He says like this: Kol nefesh, every soul needs, in order to be rectified, to occupy itself in pshat, remez, drush, sod, the 4 levels of Torah, the simple, the allegoric, and the drush, the midrashim, and also sod, the hidden secrets of the Torah, according to what that neshama is able to grasp. And the neshama is not able to come to a proper decorated state or completed state without knowing all the Torah that it needs to know. Somebody who is lazy and only achieved a little bit of that goal that it was given is going to have to come back in a Gilgul and reincarnation until he's going to understand and know all the aspects of Torah that he needs to know. So now the question arises, technically, okay, if the neshama needs to know all the Torah in order to achieve completion and not have to come back again and go to its rightful space in Gan Eden, what happens if somebody, and we said, if somebody doesn't learn because of laziness, he's going to have to come back. What happens if somebody doesn't learn, but not because of laziness, but because he's not obligated, according to the laws of Torah study, he is not obligated to study Torah? Maybe he's obligated to study a little bit in the morning, a little bit at night. We know that if a person needs, in order to make a parnos, in order to make a livelihood, has limitations on his time, so he supports himself and he makes sure to have Torah study times, but not all the time. So what happens if because of that, not because he's lazy, he's always using his time wisely, but the Torah has told him to use most of his time not for Torah study, and maybe he won't finish his allotment in this world. What happens then? If he's lazy, we understand, we send him back down again. Okay, but what if it's not laziness? So there's 2 options here, the Alter Rebbe explains. Either, you know what? If you're not able to, that means Hashem isn't expecting of it. Isn't expecting it of you. In other words, if you're not able to spend the amount of time on learning Torah, which would take you to fulfill or to accomplish all of the learning of all the various types that one needs to study, this is a sign that your particular neshama has a smaller allotment of understanding of Torah, which it needs to accomplish. And therefore, your minimal time of Torah study will be enough to fulfill the quota. Everybody has a different tank. When I fill up a gas tank, can I tell you how much gas to fill up? It depends. If you have a big SUV, it'll cost $100 to fill up the tank. If you have a small susita or whatever they're called, a small where's the word susita from? It's an Israeli car. Susita. If you have a small little mini, so maybe then at $20 will fill up the whole thing. Depends what your tank is. So a neshama that has a smaller, that doesn't have so much time to study, because in other words,
it could also be that in the previous pupil, he has learned a lot already, so he has a little more.
That could be, but what he's asking in concept. Could it be that somebody who is not allotted, what happens if a person doesn't have enough time to study, and it's not because of the laziness? What then happens? So one option is maybe could also be, that's also an option. Maybe it's the same answer. Maybe his allotment right now, his quota, either because he studied before, that's a good point, or because Hashem has said that his neshama has a smaller capacity in the first place. And so with small amount of time, he's fulfilled. Or, listen to the number 2. Since he's occupied in Torah according to his maximum abilities, Hashem will complete for him what he wasn't able to allot time for. In other words, Hashem will make sure that what he needs to achieve and accomplish will be achieved and accomplished with the time allotted to him for study Torah, even though it's a diminished amount of time. And we could say that, Rabbi says here, we could possibly say, but we could say that bichlalos in general, these 2 options about how it could be that a person learns less Torah and still fulfills his mission on life. Either his initial capacity was deemed by Hashem to be less, or he'll be able to achieve more even with less time. could be derived. Perhaps we can divide this into two corresponding levels of why somebody's unable to learn. If somebody's unable to learn because he's involved in his personal livelihood, what that means is that his neshama is not one of those that's called Morei Torah, masters of Torah. There's two general kinds of divisions of neshamas: masters of Torah, masters of good deeds. Some people that are their main objective, their neshama came here to be more focused on deeds of kindness, good deeds, proper living. There are those that their neshama is destined to be more involved in Torah, more studious, more depth in Torah. So perhaps his neshama, if he sees that his path in life is taking him on a path of having his parnasa, having his livelihood without enough personal study time, perhaps he is from the neshamas that are more inclined, that they're tasked with good deeds more than with Torah. And that's why he doesn't have the capacity. His capacity is less. And that's why the Torah that he does study is enough. That's what Hashem expects of him. And with that, he's completed his capacity of neshama. His neshama can go up, doesn't have to come back down again. If, however, the person is involved in communal work, like tzedakah, helping others, and especially if it's not just helping one or two others, it's sarchet tzibur, it's work of the community, well, then we know that we tell him that it pushes off Torah for the benefit of the community. So then it's in a way that Hashem doesn't just say, oh, you have less capacity. No, maybe this neshama is a Morei Torah, is a Torah-oriented neshama, but Hashem has said, you have the capacity to right now help others. So don't study Torah right now. Push that off. Study more Torah. But then Hashem will make sure that there'll be a wholesomeness that's attributed and granted to him, gifted to him in his study of Torah, which could also include the fact that Hashem makes him, the study that he does do becomes so blessed that in a small amount of time, he gets an accelerated grasp on Torah, which usually would have taken a lot more time. Like the Gemara in the Yerushalmi says, the Mishnah in Brachas, which says the Chasidim Arishayim, the initial pious men, they would daven 9 hours a day. They would have an hour of introspection, of meditation, an hour of davening, and an hour of kind of decompressing. 3 times a day, 3 tefillahs, that's 9 times a day. So the Gemara asks, when did they do their work and when did they study the Torah? So the Gemara in Yerushalmi answers, well, their work had it because they were Chasidim. So then, therefore, their work was blessed. And also, they were Chasidim. Hayta bracha nitenet b'toratam. There was a blessing in the Torah. In other words, they were able to understand with an accelerated godly blessing what took others longer. So they were studying, but that study was, it was so much more blessed. As it says in Zohar, it says about tzedakah, sorry, not in Zohar, it says about tzedakah that through giving to others, one's heart and mind become 1,000 times more refined. And if I'm not mistaken, the Alter Rebbe says, and it's not a guzman, it's not an exaggeration. What does it mean when somebody's mind and heart become 1,000 times more refined? If he doesn't study anything, it won't help. It's like putting 3 zeros. 3 zeros are only good if you put a 1 in front of it, it becomes 1,000. So if it becomes 1,000 times more accelerated, whatever he does learn, he's going to become blessed. You have to learn, though. So that could be, in other words, what would the 2 ways of understanding what happens to a neshama that you see doesn't have so much time to learn. Either it could be that he has less capacity. And the Rebbe said that would fit more with a person who's got personal restrictions in not being able to study. There's somebody who has who's able to study, who's not able to study because of communal responsibilities, because of tzedakah for others. It can be tzibur, it can be just because he has to help others. By the way, others could be family also. The others doesn't have to be helping the hill tribes somewhere. The charity starts at home. So, but if the reason one is unable to start that is because of helping others, then it's possible that there's an extra bracha, just like is promised to, because in other words, there's a basis for this in the Gemara, both in the Yerushalmi about Hasidim and also about tzedakah, that there's a refinement that happens, that in the small amount that he studies, is going to be blessed, that it should have much more achievement. Paragraph 7. According to this, we can now go back to the story in the Zohar and now understand the story in a beautiful light. The fact that Rabbi Shimon Yochai saw by Rabbi Yossi that there was something missing, there was a letter missing in his name, especially as, says the Rebbe, my father explains, that the letter that's missing is the Yud of Yossi, which is corresponding to the Yud of the name of Hashem. The name of the Yud is the letter that shines in the first world, Atzilus. We have Yud K Vav K, that's Atzilus, Bria, goes for the 4 worlds. So the Yud is the top world. And we want to translate that into the personal service to Hashem. That's the highest thing a person can achieve, which is the toil of Torah we spoke about, especially the toil in the secrets of Torah, which is higher than the labor in world, even though those are utterances of Hashem. And it's a mission from Hashem to be involved and engaged in the world. But those 10 utterances are the source of the 3 lower worlds. Rabbi Yossi, though, what was he missing when he was in the company of Rishim and Yochai, where that's a Yud-oriented environment? That's where there's the toil of Torah, solely Torah, exclusively Torah. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, in this environment, you're missing the Yud, the Atzilus, the top level, the Torah. I see your mind is in the important and your task, but in our context, lower level. Now here's the punchline. The fact that Rabbi Shimon Yochai saw that Rabbi Yossi had a diminishment at this time was in itself a proof to him that now Rabbi Yossi needs to take a break and needs to jump over, at least for this amount of time, certain time, he needs to jump over to the Avodah, leave his usual mission of engaging in the world, and right now he has to be engaged in Amal Torah, in the toil of Torah, in a way that fits this group of Rav Shimon Yochai. In other words, he wouldn't have had a diminishment if that wasn't what Hashem wanted him to do at that time. If Hashem indeed wanted him right now to be on the phone, handling what's going on, the crisis that's going on, Rabbi Shimon Yochai would have looked at him and wouldn't have seen the diminishment. The fact that Rabbi Shimon Yochai looks at him and says, he's here with this crowd, he's involved in something else, and I would assume if that's the thing he's supposed to be doing, I wouldn't notice anything wrong, any diminishment, but I am noticing a diminishment. So I'm going to point it out, because even somebody who's involved in Amal Sicha, somebody who's involved in the world, it seems that there's some times when he has to jump up and temporarily, at least, be involved in Amal Torah. And we could say even more than this, says Rabbi, because perhaps this was then that propitious time that we're talking about, where he could now do a little Torah, and that Torah would now multiply itself in an amazing way, right? Mm-hmm. And in the small amount that he will learn, he's going to be able to achieve so much more in the understanding of Torah. In that time that right now he's thinking of worldly things. Rav Shimon Yochai is saying, no, if I notice now that this is the time. And indeed, what happened? What was the result of this? Rabbi Yossi put his mind to the Torah. He rejoiced in the words of Torah. And then Rashbi, Rav Shimon Yochai, told him, Anshlim, now you're complete. Your image is complete. You have a wholesomeness. Even your past has now been completed. So we have here a beautiful look at the fact that there are different paths. Rabbi Yossi was doing what he's meant to be doing. Yet even then, Rabbi Shimon Yochai, by the virtue of the fact that he noticed that there was a diminishment, it meant to say that, here, 1 second, I got to invite Rabbi. I wasn't pushing down Rabbi Yossi. I know you're a good guy. I know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. Right now, this is the chance. Come. You're together with us. Join. And we find this concept, Bechlal, that everyone would teach, pointed out from various places in Torah. We see it in stages in life. There's a time when you should just be, the beginning of the life, usually we allow a person to be totally sequestered in Torah. The beginning of our day, just keep it for Hashem, daven, learn, and then go out into the world. There's even when one is your main path, there are also moments when you have to engage in another form. There can be Torah, there can be Sicha, and one has to know which one to be involved in when. But anyway, this is the Sicha as printed.
Yeah, appropriate behavior at appropriate time.